I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening to our My Horse University webinar that we are offering to you along with the Equine Land Conservation Resource and Michigan State University Extension. And just a couple things to mention before we get started. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you do have a question along the way that you want to type into the Q&A, you can do so, but the questions will be addressed at the end. As I mentioned before, we will be using the Q&A, and you will find that in the bottom part of your screen. If you click on it, a box will open up, and you can use that to type in your question. Also wanted to mention that this webinar will be recorded. We will be putting this up on the My Horse University website, so if there are others that you'd want to share this recording with later, you will be free to do so. And so without any further ado, I am going to turn this over to Denise to give you a little bit of an introduction regarding ELCR.
Hello, everyone. This is Denise. We're really pleased to be partnering with My Horse University to present these webinars, another one in our series of how they did it. If you don't know too much about ELCR, our mission as a national nonprofit is to lead in the protection and conservation of lands for the horse and horse-related activities. Our vision, which you can see, is a future in which horse lands have been conserved so that America's equine heritage lives on and the emotional, physical, and economic benefits of mankind's bond with the horse remain accessible to all. We deal with 6 different issues, and each one is a focal point for us. We talk about planning for horses in your community, and that's all of the things that go along with planning and zoning that can affect your ability to keep and use your horse. Conservation tools for horse lands, ways to protect pieces of land, farms, ranches in all different areas around the United States. We look at equine access to public lands and the things that affect that and how you can lose it and how you can gain it. We look at equine access to private lands, which is a slightly different issue because you're dealing with the private landowner that has concerns about liability and injury on their property. We look at the benefits of horses to our communities. First and foremost, we look at the economic benefits because that is the big talking point when you're talking to decision makers, but it also includes health and well-being and the spread of the economic benefits that come from other industries that are tied in with horses. And best management practices are usually tied into things that we do and put into our land that affect the impact of horses on the land and can add what we call ecosystem services to the communities that they exist in. So I am going to introduce Ms. Gwen Willis to you. She joined the Pennsylvania Equine Council sometime in the past. She was concerned about the loss of access to public lands for equine use across the country. And in 2001, the organization headed in that direction. The Pennsylvania Equine Council is a grassroots volunteer organization that represents the equine owners of Pennsylvania. Gwen has been instrumental in advocating for equestrian trails and forming relationships with decision makers, agencies, and equestrian organizations around the state and beyond. And now Gwen will be talking to you about action for equestrian trails in Pennsylvania and beyond. Gwen, take it away.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I hope you're all warm and cozy and don't fall asleep. I'm going to change slides here rapidly, so maybe that will keep you awake. It's nice and cold in Pennsylvania today. Okay, we're going to begin. As she has said, here in Pennsylvania, we were threatened in early 2000 with losing about 1.5 million acres that people in Pennsylvania always rode on. And that's kind of what spurred the Equine Council to get a little more serious about our trail stewardship. we always do, anytime I do a program here in Pennsylvania, I always do a little public service announcement about the composition of PA's general equine operations. We have showing, of course, work horses, working horses of different types, boarding stables. We have just riding stables. We have breeding, training, and just recreational folks that have their own horses. Either they board or keep them at their own properties, and about 6% of other uses of some sort. And that is really important to know, because recreational horses now, actually these numbers were from 2003, and now they're upwards of 75% for recreational horses. Okay, the big deal about having all these horses in Pennsylvania is the industries that depend on people owning horses. The truck and trailer manufacturers, the tack folks who manufacture and sell tack and carriages, also the folks who build barns, put up fencing, and the farriers, obviously, and the veterinarians and the pharmaceutical companies. We have several pharmaceutical companies in Pennsylvania, so that's important to us. And let's don't forget the farmers. That's what keeps the farmers busy, is making hay and grain substances for our animals to keep them going. A lot of dairy businesses in Pennsylvania went out of business, but now they primarily make horse hay. And some of them went into boarding for horses. So it's really important to keep that open space available. As I said earlier to the girls when we were getting started here, because of the open space that we maintain by owning horses, that also benefits our wildlife here in Pennsylvania. Okay, there's many disciplines. You know, here's just riding, jumping, dressage. We have racing, people run barrels, all types of different disciplines. But many of these same people also ride their horse recreationally, just to kind of keep their head screwed on straight. And the folks that, they rarely will say that they trail ride, though. They do dressage, or they race, or they do different things. Some folks actually work their animals and use them at home. Of course, we have breeding stock, and showing. And what better way to get your kids out and away from the screens and out into real life is to get them on the back of a horse. The Trail Stewardship Workshop, we began in 2002, actually. We did our first workshops. We're trying to find a way to get horse trails opened back up on the game lands that had shut down. But little did we know that our state forests and state parks and those managers really didn't know anything about horses or what those trails needed to be. So this is what's important, that the local, your state agencies or your state equine councils are really important to promote equine liability, equine access. In Pennsylvania particularly, we have DCNR as our Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, State Forest, State Parks, Allegheny National Forest, and state game lands. Here's some national connections too that we need to be aware of. Backcountry Horsemen of America, American Horse Council, and of course, Equine Land Conservation Resource. These are other groups that we need to be paying attention to and be members of so that we can keep good flow of information. Together, we can be one large voice. We find that the horse industry itself, if I ride a quarter horse or a mule, I usually don't talk to the folks that ride gaited horses because I don't ride with them. It's uncomfortable for me to ride with those folks. And quarter horse folks are too slow for them. So we really separate ourselves out by even what type of horse we ride. Okay, maintaining access is really important not only to all the different types of horses, but it's important that we get along with each other and share information, even though we do ride different types of animals. Okay, where do we ride? Do we ride in-state or out-of-state? State forest or state parks? National forest or national parks? County, municipal, or private land? We need to know our regulations and how those lands are managed. And that's one thing we realized right up front in 2002 is we did not understand the land that we were riding on, who it belonged to, and how that land was managed. And that was the first thing that was made perfectly clear to us. And we decided, well, if we didn't know, probably a lot of other folks don't know either. So that's where our education begins, to keep open space and to keep on the land. Here in Pennsylvania, we have major land holders. DCNR is 2.5 million acres, and that's split between state forest and state parks. State parks is only about 300,000 acres of that 1.5 million. Allegheny National Forest is 517,000 acres. Our PA Game Commission here, that's what got shut down in 2002, 1.5 million acres. That made a significant impact on our trail riding. And also national parks, we do have about 42,000 acres of national parks in Pennsylvania. DCNR, again, national or state forests and state parks. Some parks particularly do not offer equestrian use. They're small. Parks tend to be more focused on people than they are wilderness type trails or backwoods type trails. So they don't always offer. Here in Pennsylvania, and you can relate this to your state, if you have state forests, where is your forest and how is it managed? In Pennsylvania, our state is quite large, and it is broken up into 20 regions. And each region has a district forester, and that's the head of that region, and everything must go through him or her. And plus, the different regions have different topography, different soil types, different types of use. Down here in the southeast, you know, we have Philadelphia, and all these counties down here are very heavily populated, but that's also the heaviest horse area in Pennsylvania. They have more horses there than most anywhere else. So depending on where you are, what you need to know, these are those 20 regions. We always say there's 20 kings or queens in Pennsylvania that we need to find out who they are and how we can work with them. State parks is another issue. We have 121 state parks, and they're scattered out across the state. And some of these parks are in clusters. We have these little clusters here. There's 2 here together. There's 3 up here together, 3 over here together, and they usually have the same park manager. And some park may allow horse use, but the other park in that cluster does not. Okay, national parks, we have we have a lot of national parks, but usually we only think of 3: Gettysburg, Valley Forge, and the Delaware Water Gap. Now, national parks is under the Department of Interior, where, of course, our state manages our state forests and state parks, but the Department of Interior is where the national parks comes from. There are a lot of heritage areas, national landmarks, depending on where you're riding. Now, this is up in the Northeast. Actually, New York City is off to the right here, off of the slide. There's 70,000 acres in that park, and I will say they are not horse friendly. Now, this is our national forest. It's up in the northwest part of our state, and just because you're in a national forest doesn't mean it's all forest. All these little white spots are private land holdings. So even though you're in the forest, that doesn't mean you're on national forest property. The brown areas here are our state game lands, and they're managed completely differently from the state forest, state parks, or national forests or national parks. State game lands are wildlife and habitat, and recreation does not come into their management skill, and that's why we lost that 1.5 million acres initially. And there it is. It's all over Pennsylvania, and primarily that's what a lot of people rode on. They would retire, they would buy a camp or a house near a state game land so they could ride. Well, when we found out that the game lands was not meant as recreational land, that's when we had to go to work it took us about 5 years to totally get them and work with them to get their policies changed to allow for secondary activities. So it took a little bit of work, but we were able to get it accomplished. This was what was happening on a lot of the game lands, and that is why the Game Commission shut it down to other activities, mountain bikers and horses, because this is not what it was for. It was for habitat and wildlife management. Everybody says, well, that's hunting. Hunting is a management tool. If there's too many deer, they issue more hunting licenses. If there's not enough turkeys, they don't issue any licenses in that area. So hunting is a management tool, but not considered necessarily recreation to them. Okay, other trail opportunities. You can look back and around your area. Does your county or township, or do you have municipal parks? There are conservancies. We have a lot of conservancies in Pennsylvania. Actually, out east, down around Philadelphia, Brandywine Conservancy actually either has under conservation easement, owns, or has helped folks in that area conserve 64,000 acres down in the Philadelphia area in about 5 counties down there, which is a lot of land. Land trusts, different corporate lands like timber companies have big tracts of land. Greenways and trails. Most everyone, if in a city area, will find greenways or trails, rail trails, and that is another animal altogether. Usually the rail trails are under a national parks type of a thing. It's under the Department of Interior also. Okay, now here's a map. One of the things that helps us keep on the right land is a good mapping. And when we got started here in Pennsylvania in '02, DCNR, our state forest and state parks, did not have good maps. And this map actually was only developed finally in 2016, because I don't know whether you can tell, there's a little bit darker area in this white, and that's all game lands. So we had camps, and we had places where people could go and camp to ride with the elk. This is up in our elk range, Elk County and Elk State Forest. And to access the Thunder Mountain Trail system, which is this red line all up through here, they were coming across private land and then coming across game lands. And we were able to get trails in that game lands. Plus they have some that are year round now, because in Pennsylvania, usually most of our riding on game land stops the end of September due to hunting season, except for on Sundays. Okay, know the laws and regulations. In whether you're state forest, state park, national forest, national park, there are laws and regulations that affect us all. And that's the Wilderness Act, National Historic Preservation Act, National Wild and Scenic Rivers, National Environmental Policy Act, and Endangered Species Act, and Federal Land Policy and Management Act. All these laws and regulations that go with those have to be adhered to by the public land managers. That is their Bible that they go by, let alone their own internal policies. So it behooves us to try to figure out what they can do and what they cannot do. Okay, big decisions are made. These are National Forest people from Region 9. Region 9 is the northeastern 20 states of the United States. And every so many years, supposed to be 5 to 10, each forest has to complete a study and a plan on how they're going to manage their trees, how they're going to manage the invasive species, all the different things that come under that hat of being a national forest, which we think, well, recreation, and recreation is part of that. And that is a big part of their plan. But their main job is managing the trees. The National Forest is under USDA, and that is an agricultural entity, and trees are agriculture. So everything has to fit into their management plan for the trees, and recreation comes way down the list to them. So we have to try to make it easy for them. Okay, some other national committees and conferences that go on that we can learn from, and it's important to be part of committees. American Horse Council has a recreation committee, Coalition of State Horse Councils, and I noticed some of the folks on tonight were at the council meeting in Arizona last week. Equestrian Land Conservation Resource, Equine Land Resource, and I happen to sit on the Resource Advisory Committee for the ANF, that's the Allegheny National Forest, National Equestrian Trails Conference, American Trails Symposium. These are all good conferences to attend. There's state committees. If you have a state forest or state parks, they usually have an advisory committee connected to those agencies, and it is important to be a part of those or have someone in your organization as part of those advisory committees to stand up for the horses. Believe me, the hikers and the bikers are there, and rarely do the horse people get involved in these committees, and that's why we end up losing land also to ride, because there is no one there. They always say if you're not sitting at the table, you're probably on the menu. So it's important to get people out to these meetings. Technical Advisory Committee here in Pennsylvania for trails. PA Trail Advisory Committee is another important committee here in Pennsylvania, and you will have that in every state that manages grant money. They may call it something different, but when they have state grant money for trails, as well as RTP, Recreational Trail grant money that comes from the Department of Transportation, those grants have to be managed, and there has to be a citizen advisory committee overseeing that. So it's important to know that that's a committee to try to get an equestrian on in your state. Farm Bureau also in your states have an equine commodities board and a meeting that the horse people get together and try to push Farm Bureau to look at equine as a commodity, and therefore the laws and regulations that affect the horse folks. The Farm Bureau is very strong, and they can actually be a good leg up for us. Okay, the Trail Stewardship Program. Let's go into that now. We have, in Pennsylvania, we started the Trail Stewardship Program, and what that entails is it's a multifaceted program, and we address issues of non-motorized shared use trails. The days of having a single-use trail, except for the hikers, is pretty much past here in Pennsylvania anyway. There's less and less land, so we have to share trails with other non-motorized user groups, or at least parts of them. Hikers bikers, and the equestrians. Most of our problems come from user-generated trails. These trail systems have developed over time and over years. You know, we said, well, we've ridden that trail for 50 years. Well, probably nobody laid it out. It was probably a deer trail, and we followed it, and now everybody's been following it for all these years, and now it has issues on it. It has water issues or some other kind of a fixture in that area that is someone wants to protect. Okay, we have more users on less land, obviously. If a lot of the farms out east, you will see now they have a whole bunch of houses growing up in those fields. So we've lost a lot of land that we would have normally been able to ride. And the developing environmental regulations that I already kind of thumbed down through there. Different landowners and different agencies. Okay, the programs we do is to go out and talk to different groups, horse groups, different recreational groups. If there's a trail somewhere and they have a group of hikers, bikers, and horse people that they're trying to get along or trying to make an impact, we will go and talk with them. On the right here, you'll see we have a Horse World Expo every year, where for 3.5 days, every horse person just about in Pennsylvania, I think, have come through that at one point or another to learn about how to manage their horse and to buy all kinds of products. But we have the Equine Council puts up a 6-booth area, and 3 of those booths actually talk to folks about trails and how we can get those trails opened. We also do Leave No Trace, Ride Smart, Leave No Trace program that tells you how and teaches you some ideas about how to manage your horse while you're out. If most of us would ride maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, that leaves you, 18 to 20 hours a day that you must maintain that animal while you're gone. Okay, so we have 3-day workshops also. We offer a 3-day workshop, and this is for volunteers and agency personnel. As I said, when the Game Commission shut down the 1.5 million acres of land, all the people who used to ride on game lands ended up going to state forest lands and state parks. And they called us and said, could we come to the state forest people? Can we come to your program? And we said, well, yeah, but you could probably teach it. And they said, no, we do trees. We really don't understand what horse people need. I said, but you have all those nifty little signs that show horses and hikers and bikers. They said, we're just trying to sort it all out, and we really don't know what to do. So don't be surprised if in your state they're in the same condition, because really there are really no programs even at Penn State that talk about trail management. I think they're just finally starting some. Okay, we talk about concepts of layout, construction, and maintenance. Sustainability is the main thing. The more sustainable your trail is, the less maintenance it's going to require. And common terminology, what's a grade dip, what's a rolling dip, what's an outslope, what's a berm, clearing heights, clearing width, back slope, grade. All these things we have to decide when we're talking about a trail to someone else. If we're all talking the same language, then we'll understand what that trail may need and how we can fix it. And best management practices. We do a 1-day training also that talks about just the best management practices. And that's important. The 3-day, we actually have some agency folks come and talk about their agency and how they manage their lands. We have a day out in the woods actually doing some type of a best management practice. This creek actually had, the trail was up here off to the left of this slide, and the trail had run along in the creek and on both sides of the creek, and it was a mess. And Trouts Unlimited folks were pretty upset and called the state forest and said, you've got to stop this. they're silting the stream. So for a training, we do 2 3-day trainings in a row. The first training, the second day of the first training, we did the far side of the creek, and now we're doing this side for the second one. We've put in bridges, and you know, this isn't my favorite bridge, but I like to stick this slide in here to tell you whatever the agency person wants is just about what you need to be doing. We can give them ideas, and we can help them. Now this one wasn't completed yet. We needed some more kickboards on this little piece, but this was a piece of a township bridge that the forester had gotten, and he said, we're going to use that to make a bridge. I said, okay. So that's what we did. We made approaches up to the bridge. You have to keep it level, both side to side and front to back, and create an opportunity for a horse to ease up on that bridge to keep them from bypassing it and going down in the creek. So, okay, so we do the 3-day trainings. We go back in the classroom again that third day and pick up all the best management practices that we didn't need to know for the day out in the woods. Okay, so now you have 3-day trained people, but maybe 1 or 2 from each area is not going to get the job done. So they go back to their areas, and we do 1-day workshops where we talk about the same best management practices. We don't go out in the woods and do any work, but we talk about those practices and how those are implemented. So when the 3-day trained person, volunteer, and that agency person decide what needs to be done, then there's a crew to help carry out the work. We've done these in living rooms or haylofts. We really don't care. If we can get the room dark, then we can do the workshop. We also offer a packing clinic that can teach people how to pack their animal, to take in materials, so that you know, not everything is accessible by motorized. And a lot of times when you run a 4-wheeler with gravel on it or something like that, you end up doing more damage than you would if you were running horses. So we can take in materials to do steps. We can carry in gravel. Okay, we also have a program we call Ride Smart, Leave No Trace. And again, this is focused at the equestrian to try to get the equestrians to understand who owns the land, how it's managed, how we should behave as horse people when we're out on the land, to be friendly to it. Most of us are front country riders. We don't do back country. We aren't, you know, packing back in for a week and change our camp every day and do that. We go somewhere and park a trailer for 3 or 4 days, and we ride from that trailer. But the same issues for Leave No Trace all apply. And okay, so this is mid-state here. This is out in Indiana. Now this is in Missouri, and this is a good picture of some folks going through a creek. They're not just standing out there fiddling around. They've spaced themselves out. If you're riding horses with other people that your animals don't know, they aren't going to be willing to put their head down and get a drink right up behind a horse that they don't know for fear they get kicked. So try to space yourself out and just take your time and go through and let everybody drink. Walk up on the bank and let whoever else hasn't gotten offered a drink to their horse yet, and then go on with the trail ride. Here's something that everybody should do if they're riding in the woods. If you get off to take a break, to have lunch, cross tie your animal. This is just typical Leave No Trace, what you need to do. You'll see here there's some tree scratched up here. I'm not too sure a horse didn't eat that. Katie, this is my mule, and if I step off of her and she's too close to a tree, she'll have a bite out of it. And she's 20 years old. She ought to know better, but she still does it. So I have to get off of her out in the open and then get her cross-tied. This is what a lot of folks kind of think about horse people and horses. They think they stand and they paw and they they chew down trees and all that. So that's what we're trying to avoid. They always say that it's, whatever is perceived gets to be reality. It's reality to somebody, whether it's right or not. So just be careful and watch how you're managed. That's part of our Ride Smart, Leave No Trace. Highlining horses. How do you protect that tree with the tree saver? When you highline, if you're riding out, clean up under your highline all the time so that we don't step in the hay and the manure into the dirt, because if we leave it lay there all week and it rains, then when we clean it up at the end, we're going to have a crater, and then that will just hold water. So just things like that. Here again, we're doing a leave no trace here. These mules out back here are picketed, leg picketed. We have them, we train them to be hobble broke on all four legs, so we can change that strap every day to a different leg, and they can graze and eat someone else's grass. Just be sure that it hasn't been fertilized or sprayed with any pesticide. Here's a couple of our pack mules. We're taking a lunch break here, but when we unloaded Roscoe and gave him his lunch here at the trailer, we have to think about what are we going to do to clean this up when we leave. So we always carry a fork with us. If they kick anything out of the trailer, we throw it back in, and we rake up the hay and throw that in the trailer too and take it with us. I don't know how many of you have a lot of invasives. We have a lot here in Pennsylvania. This is called mile a minute. The southern states pretty much have it, and out east in Pennsylvania have it. And when I ride out east, before I come home, I pick the horse's feet out and brush them down good, because I don't want any of these seeds coming back to my farm. So if you even ride in different states, before you leave any area you're staying in, make sure you clean up your horse and pick their feet before you take anything home with you that you don't want. Emerald ash borer, that's been a big deal. We lost that battle here in Pennsylvania. All our ash trees are dead, but now we have the lanternfly. So there's always an invasive trying to ruin what was here naturally. Let me see. Okay, working together to educate, to conserve, and to enjoy the outdoors. That's what it's all about. We were working with this state forester here because he had taken over one of those 20 regions, and he said, would you guys come up and help me find my signs? Because I'm new here. People are calling me, they're always lost. So that big deal is getting good signage and getting good trails. This is a group at the Allegheny National Forest in '05. The Allegheny National Forest was going through its rewrite. You can see the stack of papers here on the desk, their rewrite of their forest plan. So that was a big deal. They were going to shut the horses down to 3 small areas, less than 12% of the forest, on designated trails only. The problem was Allegheny National Forest did not have any designated horse trails. So if someone wanted to push the issue, they could have basically shut everybody off of Allegheny National Forest also. So that's, if we can be proactive before something like that happens, that's the trick. Okay, so we worked with this fella. He was, Joe was the recreational fellow for the whole forest, the whole 500,000 acres, and all user groups. So luckily he was a horse guy. And we went up and was looking at different issues to try to keep it open. And we were able to do that. We were able to keep the trails open outside of equestrian use areas. There were some heavily impacted areas around commercial operators, and those did have to go to designated trails because there was so much impact. But then outside of those smaller areas, we could ride open. So that was able to get rectified. Here's a group just put in a culvert. It was a muddy area, and it didn't take them long. They started working with our state forest, and in one afternoon they got this all put in, and that saved that trail. Here's another, we always put Elaine in the mud here. She's our Vanna White of the mud. She's standing in an area, this is called the Horseshoe Trail in Pennsylvania, and it runs from Philadelphia, runs up almost to Harrisburg. And it actually goes through a game lands. And remember, that's the game lands is where we all got shut off of. But this was the first trail that they gave us back and grandfathered it in, but it needed help. The hikers had been walking on boards. The horses had been going through the mud. There was a road to the right-hand side of the slide. There was a hill to the left-hand side, and there's nowhere for the water to go. So Ted and Elaine worked with the Game Commission person in that area, the land manager, to decide what they wanted to do, and that they were allowed to go in and fix this. And that land manager, whether it's state forest, state park, whoever, they're in charge of getting permits if it's necessary. So we always have to, allow them that. I don't plan on getting it done this week if you just talked to them last week, because sometimes permits take a long time. So here's a muddy mess. They really couldn't get rid of the mud, so they put down geotextile on top of it. They really couldn't staple it down. Typically we staple down geotextile, but it was all mud and goo and there wasn't anything to staple it to. So and you can see off here to the left-hand side of the slide, that's all the further they are away from the road. So they just used a wheelbarrow and wheeled the stone. I usually say gravel, but I'm trying not to do that. We use limestone, never use round river gravel. That's a big mistake. It never lays still. So we use crushed limestone, or this is 2B actually, it's bigger stone and it allows for drainage. And they put down about 2 inches. They needed 6-inch cell to put on top of this. And I'll show you what the cell is. There's the cell, but they could only get 4-inch cell at the time, and it's perforated. You can see the holes in it. So they put down 2 inches of stone, put down 4-inch cell, and then that's filled with stone, and then they put 2 inches on top of it because it will compact. If you can use a plate compactor on it as you do this, it would be a good idea to get that packed in right away. So they have the water going right through the fixture already. And this works good over a spring seep also. So now they're trying to block the horse folks from going around the fix. A lot of people don't like, when it's bright and shiny new, they're afraid it's going to hurt their horse's feet. So you have to focus their activity on the improved surface. You can see here they left the boards here just to keep horse people from being over here and kind of directioned everybody. So there it is. 2 hours is all it took to make that. Now, they had to work with Game Commission, they had to gather materials, all of that, but it only took 2 hours of their time. And 2 years later, this is what you have. They're riding in good, sustainable trails. Okay, this is another thing. Our 3-day trained folks built stalls in an area, the state forest put a big cul-de-sac in the woods, and we had 6 campsites, back-in areas they fixed with stone, and they bought the materials for the stalls. I had given them the plans, and then our volunteers came up and built the sets of stalls. There was 6 sites, so we built 6 stalls, sets of stalls that each one would hold 4 horses. And there it is. Okay, here we are. Where do you fit in? What can you do in your state? What organizations are you involved with? And what exactly is it that you may want to try to figure out to promote and to protect horse access. Okay, we're ready for questions. See, everybody went to sleep.
Okay, it looks like we do have a few questions in the Q&A. Denise, are you able to get them open?
Maybe I could take this first one.
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay, it says in Illinois, it's not legal to help build, maintain, or repair trails on state lands. And I would guess that would be because they would be afraid of, well, you may be unionized for one thing, and that can cause a problem. Horse people had to get a law passed so volunteers could help on state land. Sometimes that's what it takes. Volunteer even if you want to. Well, in our state, I guess we have our state so they're convinced that recreation, see, agriculture is our #1 industry in Pennsylvania, and tourism and recreation is #2, and horses fall into both of those categories. So we always tell our representatives and senators, you know, we need to be able to help because our agencies do not have any money. So they need some help. And we have not had a major problem with parks. Sometimes their union gets a little touchy. Okay. Whoop. Okay. How many miles of equine trails are there in Pennsylvania? Boy, legal or illegal, maybe I should say. There are probably 5,000 miles of trails, but they're not all marked. So it's, I don't have a total number in Pennsylvania. We've been working on it. As I said, our DCNR pretty much got caught with just managing their trees for years and allowing recreation. So we've been 15, 16 years trying to play catch up. Okay, what are the best questions to ask and approach in order to find how much managers know about horses? I would just go under the premise they know nothing, because most of them don't. Most of the folks who manage forest or parks, some of them may be hunters, but typically people get into parks and recreation because they like to recreate, and most of them are either hikers or bikers. So asking questions, just point blank ask them if they have any horse experience. And even if they do, they may not know how to appropriately apply it to trail management. U.S. Forest Service, are they prohibiting new trails? In Pennsylvania and most forest services, there always has to be, they usually have to go through a NEPA process. They have to go through environmental assessments. They are busy and they don't want to be bothered with paperwork, so they will say, oh no, we're not putting in any new trails. And the state will do the same thing, because it's a lot of paperwork. And if you can do anything to encourage them and make it easier for them, that's where we have to go, because they don't have the manpower to put in trails or to maintain what they already have. So it's we actually have some trails up in the Allegheny National Forest now that need built, but right now they're looking at applying for grant money for the materials, and we're going to go from there. Okay, I hope that helped. Now, what size stone at the bridge? Those approaches or soft areas. Firstly, you never put down stone that you don't use geotextile under it unless the area is underlaid with a lot of rock. You always use, and we typically use 2B just because that size of stone, when you order stone, the stone is the cheap part. Getting it trucked to your location is the hard part and the expensive part. So we're cheap, and we usually only have one truck come. It's always nice to put down the 2B and then top dress it. If it's not going to get washed with a lot of water, top dress it with a crush and run is what we like to do. Okay, where are the one-day management practice sessions? They are anywhere you want them to be. As I said, we will go, typically we've kept them pretty much in Pennsylvania. We have had some folks from out of state come to our 3-day, and then we just ran up over the border up into New York and conducted some 1-days up there for them. Usually wherever we can get them set up in Pennsylvania, we will do that. I have a form that you can kind of read down through how to go about setting up a 1-day, and first clear it with us to make sure we're available, and then talks about find a place and what do you do about lunch and all those things. And even I have some mock-up flyers that can be altered to help you advertise it too. So if anybody wants to reach me about that, we can do that. Okay. Do we have any funding from the horse community for all the great work? No, we don't actually. From Pennsylvania Equine Council does not fund trail work. What we try to do is get these different groups going with a 3-day trained coordinator. The volunteer had been there for 3 days, get a 1-day group, and it's amazing how our state will actually put up a lot of the materials if they can get the volunteers to do the work. And also REI, you can check them out, and they have some funding available, as does STEP with quarter horses, and some of the endurance riding folks have grants available. Okay. No. Did we end up hiring professionals to do the mapping of the trails? No. Actually, the DCNR, before the trails are put in on our state lands, or on federal lands for that matter, they walk them with the GPS and have that track, and then they have to run that through an environmental assessment. In Pennsylvania, for the state, it's called a PNDI, Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Inventory. And what that does is checks for endangered species, whether it's plants or animals. So those are already GPSed. Our state actually does their own maps. Our state forests and state parks do their own maps. We confer with them to make sure that they are in the right place, and we've already worked with them about how to lay out the trails so that they are in good places. So they have their own work. They have their own mapping system and printers, actually. Okay, how are the equine volunteer groups organized in Pennsylvania? Is there an umbrella group? Well, the umbrella group here is the Pennsylvania Equine Council. We have pretty much, since '02, have been doing 3-day trainings, and then subsequent 1-day trainings to organize these groups. So those individuals have to be pretty much self-starters. We will go with them and to their first meetings with their county or their state forest or whoever, and we will go with them and help them get their foot in the door and see if there is opportunity. You know, sometimes there's just not opportunity where you want to ride. We've actually have one big park, and it's written right in there that there will be no horse access. So that was deeded that way, and there's nothing they can do about that. So yes, we are the umbrella group here in Pennsylvania. Okay. You have conflicts with horses and mountain bikes. Somewhat. We do have some conflicts. We have had horses knocked down by mountain bikers. We have to remember as a horseback rider, if you see a bike coming at you, you need to speak up, because a mountain biker will be looking at the ground in front of them about 10 to 15 feet, and they're really not paying a lot of attention otherwise, unless they're kind of taking a break and just kind of going easy. So, we need to learn to be user-friendly to them also and let them know somebody's there. We do have a lot of mountain bikes in Pennsylvania. I will tell you, we have a lot of colleges, a lot of college towns, and a lot of guys on bikes. So sometimes we do have conflicts. Okay, who pays for the materials you use? Who does the ongoing maintenance of the trails? Okay, the materials we use during our trainings, our program pays for that, because I get a grant to buy materials for the programs. Other than that, sometimes the state forest or park will buy them. Sometimes someone in the area knows someone at the local quarry, and they'll get the stone donated, and the geotextile and the geocell, sometimes if that's necessary. We also build a lot of steps in and out of streams. So all those things, I could do about 10 more programs on all best management practices that we use. So, okay. Do you deal with
Gwen?
Yes.
Hi, I'm back.
Hey.
I lost my microphone for quite some time there.
Oh my God, I know, I'm reading away here.
But you're doing a good job.
Okay.
Do you want me to go ahead and handle these last few questions for you?
Sure, go ahead.
Duke Monson asks, do you deal with trails crossing private lands, and how is the liability handled?
Okay.
That's a good question.
Yes, and you could probably answer that one, but here in Pennsylvania, if there's private land and we're going from a piece of public land to other public land, like state forest and state park, that the state forest or park will hold that easement or hold that agreement, pretty much. Now, we also, each state has a recreational use statute that supposedly, in Pennsylvania, no matter what happens, someone can sue you at any time. But there's a recreational statute that says that if you allow people to use your property, that they can't be held liable for problems unless it's something that, they have done maliciously.
Yeah,
so,
wanton neglect.
Yes, wanton neglect. Mm-hmm. Now, there was just last week, the governor signed a new one, and I haven't dug through it yet because it kind of got slipped in, saying that you can do some fixing of trails. You can do trail improvement. A lot of times they'll tell you can't do improvement because therefore that creates the liability issue. But we're just looking at that now. It just came up and I've been gone. So that was that. Yep. Anyhow, the agency usually holds it, or the township or someone like that will hold the easement. Or you folks could hold the easement, maybe.
Yes, there are some restrictions that go along with that. One of them being that you're not supposed to charge people for being able to use a trail on your land. That once you charge people, it becomes a business, and that's a whole different ball of wax.
Right.
But the recreational liability laws are very good. There's only one state left, and of course, don't ask me which one it is. New York just got theirs this past year. That was a hard-won success for them to get that. So, congratulations to New York.
I'll take this.
Okay.
This one. Has anyone had experience with e-bikes? That is just an emerging situation now. I'd be interested in talking to you, Dawn, about it. I can see that there's going to be an issue. A lot of the agencies say non-motorized means non-motorized.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how that's going to go. It is just now rearing its head. And we just had a PA Trail Advisory meeting a couple weeks ago, as well as a Greenways and Trails Conference, and that's where it came up. So it's just starting that conversation. But
Good question.
Yes, Dawn, if you would like to, they're going to offer my email at the end of this. So if you want to talk about this, I would be glad to talk to you about it.
Okay, next question. How is your program funded?
Okay, we get an educational grant. Now, we're volunteers and we do not get paid. We have worked out the agreement with the funding from the grant that we can buy materials for the trail work, which doesn't happen very often really because we don't do it at a 1 day. We only use it for the 3 days or an extended training. We can buy our projector, our laptop, display information, some tools that we show and that we tell people, we train people how to use the tools, which we don't have a lot of them, but just the basics. And our printed material, our handout material can be paid for. It does not cover food. And we do get mileage. But we match it with our in-kind hours is our match, which I'm always way over the money we spend just in kind, traveling to workshops, traveling to meetings, the time we spend in education. Like if this were a Pennsylvania program here today, I would take this hour and a half of prep of the time that I've spent, for the hour for the meeting for this program and then the half hour. And I would say, okay, there, I have an hour and a half. And I would, that gets a monetary allowance. And then that offsets. Okay, how is it funded? It is funded through an educational grant through DCNR, State Forest and State Parks, DCNR, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources is who handles our grants in Pennsylvania. Now they do handle the RTP funding also, plus there's 4 or 5 other Keystone Fund. There's a few more different funds, conservation grants that they have. And depending on what grant you're going for, you should be able to find something in your state that would do an educational grant. To get paid to do this, I don't know that that's ever going to happen. It hasn't happened yet. That would be nice, but it's just a labor of love to get people to be able to grow up and have the opportunity. My husband and I have had the best of it. We grew up on the back of a horse or a pony, and we've seen the best of it, but we want this to be available. So we do this all the time. And that's pretty much our our deal. Okay.
Oh, great.
Again, I'll be glad to talk more if anybody wants to contact me.
Yes. Gwen, how are we on time?
It looks like we are a little past 8 o'clock, but we can go ahead. I think there's just a couple more questions in here.
Yes.
If you want to address them, that's fine.
Okay. Debbie Briscoe has 2 questions. Her first is, are the project the projects that volunteers are helping with organized by the volunteer group, or are they organized by the manager?
Okay, they're organized by both of them.
Uh-huh.
You have to have an approved project. Just because you've been to a workshop and know what's the best thing to do, you never go on public land or private land and do things without permission. For starters, the state forest and state parks or whoever there has to be an approved project, and then the volunteers, we have a plan of action usually with a state forest or a state park. If there's this big trail and there's many things need done, they will prioritize what needs to be done first. So you just kind of pick away at it. The person who is working with the agency is usually the 3-day trained person with the agency person, and then they contact the other group, the 1-day trained group, their stewardship group, and they decide when they can do the work and who's going to bring the tools or who's going to pick the tools up from the state or whatever, and who ordered the materials, unless the state is ordering the materials, and then you have to tell them how much you need and what you're going to do. And, it's just a work in progress. So the volunteers usually do the organization of it.
Okay, and Debbie has a second question, and this will be our last question. Can you tell us more about your recreational trail standard manual? What does it cover?
Okay, the manual that the state put out covers it talks about best management practices to a point. I don't know whether you've seen one. It's pretty superficial, actually. It doesn't really get into the nuts and bolts of it so much, because they do want latitude to, every situation sometimes maybe takes a little bit different approach. So it's really hard to have hard and fast rules for these standards. You can contact me and you can see it online. You can there's different states have different manuals. I'd be glad to walk through it with you. Let me know and we'll try to set you up here.
Very good. Really great questions from everyone. I would like to thank everyone on behalf of ELCR for sticking with our series of How They Did It webinars and informational pieces. I believe...
I'm trying to move this thing and it won't move.
Oh, I'm having little stickies here.
Gwen, if you go ahead and just left click on the PowerPoint, it should activate it again, and then you can click on the next.
Now I lost my cursor.
There we go.
There it is.
Yeah.
Left.
There we go.
There you go. Aha. Good job.
All right. Perfect. Well, Denise, did you have anything else to share?
Yes, as we were going through this, I realized that a lot of the questions that people were asking about volunteer management, funding, etc., are some of the issues and recommendations that came out of our 2017 survey of equine land conservation and equine advocacy organizations. Take a breath. That we did last year to find out what the organizations that are dealing with advocacy issues are being faced with. And those two that I just mentioned, along with how to form coalitions and how to qualify professional services, were some of the main recommendations that we had. So if you get a chance, go visit our website. It's just elcr.org, and scroll through the carousel, and it will take you to the survey report, and you can see what the recommendations were and how we came across them. But it was really interesting to see those questions come up. So I want to thank everybody again.
Might I butt in just a second here on that?
Yep.
In our 1-day training and our 3-day trainings, we actually go through a what do we do now We know the stuff. How do we proceed?
Right.
So I talk about organizing the group and how to reach out to the agency and kind of timelines and what to plan on. So that's
Right.
also in our program.
That's great. So with that, are we, oh, you have a commercial for an upcoming webinar.
Yeah, just a couple things to mention before we conclude this evening. One, we will be sending out a link to the recording to everyone who registered. And also with that recording, we will have a survey that we hope that everyone will take just a few minutes to answer the questions in that survey. You also will be directed to the survey once you leave the webinar this evening, and I actually will bring it up in just put it in the chat for everybody as well. Also, do want to mention an upcoming webinar that we have on December 11th, 2018. Dr. Christine Skelly, she is the director of My Horse University and an associate professor here at Michigan State. She will be talking about developing your personal horse network. So think about all the people in your horse network, from your farrier to your trainer to a nutritionist, or the variety of different people that you work with, and kind of finding the best people for your network. So stay tuned for this upcoming webinar. Details will be on our website at myhorseuniversity.com. And the next slide, please. There we go. So just once again, we want to thank everyone for joining us today. Especially want to thank Denise O'Meara from ELCR and Gwen Willis from the Pennsylvania Horse Council. Really appreciate you taking your time today to help us offer this webinar, and also want to thank all of our participants as well. So with that, do you have any final comments, Gwen or Denise?
Just thank you all for hanging in here. It's it's hard from 7 to 8 o'clock at night to pay attention. I know
it is. Everybody stuck with it pretty well.
Yep.
I just want to mention we will have another of our series of how they did it webinars in February. That's going to be real interesting, and we'll have more information on that in our e-blasts and on Facebook and any other way we can get the information out there. And that will also be in partnership with My Horse University.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we appreciate you being here this evening.
All righty. Thank you so much.